everyone, and welcome to another English with Dry. Today we're going to take a look at the first unseen poetry question from English Language Paper 2. The first thing, of course, that you have to do, as always, is look at the entire section. Now, obviously there are two unseen questions you have to do. Today we're just going to be looking at the first. You will be given a poem, obviously, and then you will be given a question that will usually be about how the speaker presents an attitude to a specific theme. Now, this poem is the wonderful Maya Angelou's poem on aging. The essay is out of 24, and this year alone so far, you'll be getting 4 marks for spelling. That is purely because of the changes that have been created by COVID. Usually there's no spelling marks. But the way you approach the question for the 24 marks is very much the same as always. We'll just have a quick read through the poem, just to get ourselves familiar with it. When you see me sitting quietly like a sack left on the shelf, don't think I need your chattering, I'm listening to myself. Hold, stop, don't pity me. Hold, stop your sympathy. Understanding if you got it, otherwise I'll do without it. When my bones are stiff and aching and my feet won't climb the stair, I'll only ask one favour, don't bring me no rocking chair. When you see me walking, stumbling, don't study and get it wrong, 'cause tired don't mean lazy, and every goodbye ain't gone. I'm the same person I was back then, a little less hair, a little less chin, a lot less lungs and much less wind, but ain't I lucky I can still breathe in. Now, this is a step-by-step guide, just like we did with Macbeth, and the first step is always, in such things, identify the keywords in the question. So if we look at this, on aging, how does the poet present the speaker's attitude to growing old? You guessed it, the key term in this case is growing old. Okay, now so usually you will be asked about the attitude of the speaker. Obviously you'll have to notice they don't say the poet, because clearly in poetry it is a speaker that the poet is kind of giving their message through a lot of the time. Now in this case the central theme is clearly the growing old, the getting older process. And so everything you talk about in your essay should be linked to this central idea. Step number 2 is read the title and use it to work out the poet's attitude to this key theme. Okay? Now in this it's simply on aging, and obviously I've picked an example here that isn't the best illustration of my step-by-step plan, because it doesn't give you all that much information. But what if we look at it even more closely, which actually it's requiring us to do on this occasion, maybe we can get something. Here, the word aging is used. Now, that's different to, say, getting older or maturing or anything like that, because it's got some specific connotations. Aging generally is a negative way of describing getting old, and what it specifically talks about and refers to is somebody who is getting quite old, so elderly. And then, therefore, we can kind of infer straight away that this poem might be about attitudes towards the elderly, and specifically maybe fears that we have in society or prejudices about getting older. So step 3 then is to read the first and last lines to kind of identify the poet's overall message. The idea here is if you look at how they begin and end, then that gives you a good idea of how the poem might change over time. It's the same reason why you read an entire play or book before you actually write an essay about it, because you need to know what happens. It's the same with this unseen poem, and this is kind of a cheat way of doing that very quickly. So the first line, when you see me sitting quietly, and then the last line is, but ain't I lucky I can still breathe in. So with this first line, what we can see is, again, not that much. But if we are influenced by what we've already said, okay, we can tell from that when you see me sitting quietly that maybe the speaker leads a fairly solitary life. We think about the fact this poem is about growing old, which we've already established, then it almost becomes quite sad, because it suggests the speaker has almost been left by themselves during this getting older process. And it makes us reflect on the fact that often people who are older are left on their own, and how that is a really very unfortunate thing. And this is interesting because it then presents a contrast with the last line, but ain't I lucky I can still breathe in, because the word lucky stands out as being a positive ending. And it kind of contrasts with this negativity, because it makes us think that actually the speaker is appreciative of the good things about getting older. And so therefore we can start to put together a mental image that the speaker's attitude is one of, yes, you might think this is a bad thing, but actually I'm going to argue it's a good thing, this getting older process. And so you can see from these 3 steps already, we are starting to put together a picture of this poem in our head that we are going to then write about. Step 4 then, and that's when I believe you should select what, in your opinion, is the most important line in the poem. Now, to be honest, I think you should select 2 or 3, because that gives you the most you can then write about. But the reason for this is because it helps to begin analysing the poet's methods. So I've selected "like a sack left on the shelf." Now this is only the 2nd line of the poem, I know, but I think it's really the best. Now, it's often good to try and pick something with a real kind of rich quality of emotive language or passionate or strong language, because then you can just analyse that more easily. Luckily, this one also has a simile. Now, you really don't need to have to play the imagery spotting game in this question. There are no marks for kind of cleverly saying, well, I've discovered a personification or a metaphor. Obviously, it's great if you can talk about those things, but just purely feature spotting is something you will never get marks for, trust me. And so therefore, if you can pick something that's got one of these things in it, great, but if not, don't worry about it. It's much more important that you start to get into what you're going to say about the writer's message and the attitude. So I've picked the simile, "like a sack left on the shelf." Now, what I would then say is, well, this gives me a lot of good words to talk about, because it really kind of fits in with this attitude of how elderly people can be seen as a burden or useless or unwanted. But then obviously over the course of the poem, the speaker disproves this and kind of talks about how that's actually not fair. So this is a good line to have selected. Step 5, and we're even narrowing it down further because I want you to pick the most important word that's in the poem so that your analysis can be even more detailed. This is a fantastic way to get the AO 2 marks of analysing the writer's methods. So I've picked sympathy. It's a word that comes up once, and I think it's really kind of pregnant with a lot of meaning. And by selecting this keyword, it kind of forces you to show you've really understood on a very, very minute detail, in very minute detail, what the writer or the speaker is trying to get across. And so this word sympathy shows that often, it shows this kind of complicated thing that often people feel sorry for the elderly, but they don't really know why they feel sorry for them. They just do. Maybe because they can't do the things they always once did. Who knows? But it's that kind of many layers of meaning to this word that have made me pick it. Now, I want you to pick 2 or 3 of these most important words, because the last thing you want to do is find yourself writing an essay and then suddenly realise you've run out of things. But it's a great way to focus your prep for writing an essay about a question to actually have these things already highlighted, okay? So these are the 5 steps, and then of course what you start doing is start writing. Now don't get me wrong, these 5 steps shouldn't take you long, okay? The writing is the most important thing, but if you plan beforehand, it will be easier for you to write quickly. And so I'm just going to, as I did with the Macbeth essay, show you an example paragraph. Now, obviously you don't need to write as much for unseen poetry. There is absolutely no mark for AO3, which is context or background or historical ideas. You don't need anything like that. So really what you're being marked on is your ability to answer this question and your ability to analyse the methods. So, I begin. In Maya Angelou's On Aging, the theme of growing old is presented as something that should not hold people back from living enjoyable lives and should not be the cause of people being underestimated. Now, what you'll notice that I've done is exactly the same as when I write a paragraph in any single literature essay. I have directly answered the main question. I've talked about growing old, and I've specifically said what the writer, the poet, and the speaker's message is about that. You know, if you take that one single line, you could say, right, well, that's this person's argument. Great. The first 2 lines describe how old people can be seen quietly, like sacks left on shelves. This simile shows the speaker's attitude that people can often look at old people and feel a sense of sympathy or pity, just because of how they appear. The connotations of describing elderly people as sacks are that they are shapeless and unappealing, almost as if they are hardly good for anything. Now what you'll see is I have again related to the question with the speaker's attitude, but I've also gotten in very quickly to analysing the quote, much more quickly than you would in an essay about Macbeth or A Christmas Carol or Inspector Calls or whatever it is you're studying. And that's because that's just how you answer the unseen question. You know, they are more generous in terms of awarding marks for your essays because they don't need quite as much structure. the analysis of the methods are the most important things. That's why I've got into it so quickly. That's why in my planning I've really focused on what does the title mean, what are the first and last lines mean, what's the most important line, what are the most important words. The connotations of describing elderly people as sacks are they're shapeless and unappealing, almost as if they're hardly good for anything. So that is me really developing analysis of language, which is how you get good marks in GCSE English, especially with the AQA, Connotations of keywords are just the best thing to do in terms of gaining these marks. However, the speaker goes on to insist that we don't pity them, which suggests her attitude that in fact older people have just as much to offer and can enjoy life just as much as everyone else. So as I say, I've started to analyse this keyword, but you'll notice that sacks was not my first choice word. I picked sympathy. But this one here fits in better with what I've been saying. And then, of course, if I were to continue writing this essay, I would then go on to talk about sympathy. I've got that up my sleeve to talk about next, so I don't have to even pause for breath to think, well, what am I going to say next? This is why you should have a few key, most important lines and most important words. That one is the absolute minimum. But you can see from the beginning of this that I follow the usual structure of answering the question to begin with, giving my evidence, analysing the method, and then at the end linking back to what the attitude of the speaker is. But I'm just answering their question. It's all I'm doing. It's no more, it's no less. So please do think about these 5 steps when you come to the first unseen question. I'll be looking at unseen question 2, the 8 marker, in a later video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope this was helpful.